Senator McKenzie.
I rise as Leader of the National Party in the Senate to thank both the Leader of the Government and the Leader of the Opposition for their honest, kind and very thoughtful contributions. We are at our very best in this chamber when we do remember those past, irrespective of our differences in political persuasions and the contribution that we all seek to make in this chamber on behalf of our nation and our communities. Senator Ron Boswell AO served in this place from his election as Senator for Queensland from 1983 until the expiration of his 7th term in 2014. That is an extraordinary 31 years, 3 months and 26 days. For 17 of those years, Senator Boswell was Leader of the Nationals in the Senate, a position for which he gained great respect across the political divide. And the fact that both the Prime Minister of Australia and former Prime Minister John Howard both attended his funeral in Brisbane, I think is testament to the esteem he was held in right across the political spectrum. And what an amazing sight it was at his funeral to see his former National Senate colleagues Barry O'Sullivan, Nigel Scullion, John Wacker-Williams, Peter and Julian McGorran, although Julian will never get over that defection in Victoria, and Sandy McDonald act as pallbearers at his funeral. Bozzy, as he was known, was a champion of many issues, notably small business, but also primary industries, fishing, sugar, pineapples, tobacco and beef. He was also a champion of the family and of traditional rural and family values. He was a man of faith, a man of conviction. He held firmly two positions on abortion, on euthanasia and on same-sex marriage. And in taking the honour to participate in this condolence motion, I want to mention a few things about Ron Boswell that were emblematic of his work as senator and as a person, and from which we can all learn from his long and distinguished career. The first was that Bozzy never sought the heady stratosphere of being a cabinet minister. He did turn down numerous opportunities to become a minister when he could have so easily demanded one. He did serve 4 years as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport and Regional Services from 1999 to 2003, and in various shadow ministerial positions, including Regional Development and External Affairs, Northern Australia, External Territories and Consumer Affairs. But Bozzy knew instinctively that there was often more power, influence and freedom being on the outside than as a cabinet insider. He could always stay true to his values and closer to the people who elected him by being a troublesome outsider, and troublesome he was. On telecommunications for the bush, on the sale of Telstra, on the sugar industry, on trade, on pharmacies, on banks when it came to post office, carbon taxes and competition policy. Bozzy was troublesome indeed, irrespective of who was sitting on the Treasury benches. Senator Boswell also made a calculated but principled decision to rebuff what one might broadly call the lunar right in Queensland. Despite the claims by the Greens and prominent members of the ABC, Australia is not a racist country, not remotely. We're one of the most welcoming countries in the world, where people from every corner of the earth have come to live, to start a new life and to grow, contribute and prosper. But that is also not to say that there are no racists in Australia. Following warnings from former journalist Tony Kosh from The Australian about the League of Rights, Bozzy set about investigating and then distancing himself from the group which had infiltrated the highest level of the Queensland National Party and who were moving into evangelical churches across Queensland as well. This was a group that was deeply anti-Semitic, racist, that denied that Jesus Christ was a Jew and had crackpot ideas about social credit and the economy. In a landmark speech in 1988, Bozzy spoke out against the League. For many months afterwards, the retribution was savage, but eventually the churches too recognised that they were being used by the League. Bozzy believed in the dignity and respect of every person, regardless of creed or colour. It's worth noting that later, when he took on One Nation, Bozzy says he fought against the party with all the fora available to me as a senator. But in his memoir he writes, "I did not participate in any attempts to involve the criminal justice system. Hanson's prison sentence was a grave error that only saw her become a political martyr, not a strategy I would ever support." Bossie believed that traditional rural values of community, of patriotism, of property rights, private enterprise, of supporting traditional faith and the family, which are all under attack from globalism, liberalism and socialism, were battles enough on their own without having to deal with the conspiracy theories of crackpots. Indeed, leadership in a democracy is not agreeing to every populist theory or current opinion. Very often it is saying what is unpopular, but what is also right. A former insurance and paintbrush salesman, Bossie was a strong proponent of the private enterprise philosophy that encouraged people to run their own businesses, but not unbridled markets. As he said in his maiden speech, the National Party, however, will not and does not support the argument that the market must find its own level, that the big must get bigger and that the small must wither and die. My party wishes to see private enterprise flourish and grow, with all Australians enjoying the benefits which this creates. It was a theme throughout his career. Market power is so fundamentally important to the prices of everything we put into the supermarket trolley, he wrote in his autobiography, co-authored by Joanne Newbury. Early in Parliament, working in cahoots, as he so often did, with a variety of souls, with South Australian Labor Senator Chris Schatt during the Hawke government, Bossie successfully struck a blow for the reform to the Trade Practices Act, much to the chagrin of his Liberal Party colleagues. Bossie recalls reminding his Liberal colleagues in the joint party room of a speech by Sir Robert Menzies, in which Australia's longest-serving Liberal Prime Minister said, "Australian Liberals are not the exponents of an open go, for if we are all to have an open go, each for himself, and the devil take the hindsight, anarchy will result, and both security and progress will disappear." Deregulation, Bossie warned, was not the answer to all problems. He also used the committee system in the Senate effectively, establishing deep connections into regional Australia, where he championed for so many causes, including for the freedom of Lindy Chamberlain. As the ever-astute John Roscombe, former IPA chief, said of Ron Boswell, he was a far more significant figure in Australian politics and public policy than 80% of the people who've been minister. Thank you, John, as always, for your insightful recollections. Roscombe compared Senator Boswell with the late Bert Kelly, a long-serving Liberal backbencher, but to whom no less than Gough Whitlam described as the most influential, modest member of Australian Parliament. Yet despite this, Bossie was also a fierce coalitionist. He was a Queensland Nationals, an admirer and confidant of Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen in his younger days, and he recognised the value in the superglue of the combined strength of the Nationals and the Liberals. Yes, it's true that later in his career he worked closely with the Katter Party and regretted the amalgamation of the rival Queensland right-of-centre parties into the LNP because the Brisbane Liberals had become the dominant force within the LNP. But Bossie's way of doing politics was elbows out and spare the niceties. And I think anyone that ran into him or was bowled over by him in the corridors would always recall that he was often carrying lunch on his tie for afters. I regularly visited his apartment overlooking the Brisbane River following his retirement, where advice flowed, as did terrible coffee and biscuits. Yes, Bossie, I have my writing orders. But he always said to me, if you're going to lead, bloody well lead. Anyone who's been on the end of multiple phone calls from Bossie when he wanted something knew this methodology very well. If he couldn't get around the brick wall in front of him, he'd knock it down. Very often, he didn't bother making an appointment. He'd just barge into ministerial offices when he needed something. And he never really retired from politics, giving advice to sitting MPs on an almost daily basis, and many sitting here today will know of the constant phone calls. He also was an influential player behind the scenes, and I think of the sacking during question time of former CEO of Australia Post, Christine Holgate, and the role that Bossie played throughout that Senate inquiry in supporting Ms Holgate through that period. He championed fairness to the very end, irrespective of who you were. And he wrote newspaper columns, and his last was on his last birthday, and it was about betrayal and how much he loved our party. Ron's beloved wife later died in 2012, was a driving force behind his career, but also a great support to him. After the couple lost their son Stephen to a brain hemorrhage, a situation he never got over, Ron and Lita built a high school in East Timor in his honour. And it was an act of extraordinary generosity, but one of many such acts of generosity that Ron made during his life. They are survived by his daughter Kathy, who's here in the gallery, and together with Sophie, who's also here, also Tom and Will and his great-grandchildren, Charlie and Bonnie, of whom he was so proud. This is not a man who just spoke about family values. He lived family values. I'd also like to recognise his National Party colleagues, Lou O'Brien and Colin Boyce, who he also loved. Bossie, you were a remarkable man, a great Queenslander, a mentor and a guide. We will miss you dearly. And it would be remiss of me if I didn't encourage you all to buy his book, Always a Salesman. It's well worth the read. Our party, our parliament and our nation are greater for your service. Vale, Ron Boswell.